Hello there, welcome to Wednesday's ESPN FC Live. The quad box is in operation. Mark Donaldson, Stevie Nicol, Mark Ogden and Ryan O'Hanlon with you today. We're talking about the US men's national team finally getting their man, and we will preview the weekend Premier League action later and review the first three games. But I want to start with Mauricio Pochettino. The US men's national team have finally got their man, Stevie Nicol. Thoughts on the appointment?
Well, I think initially it seems like a fantastic appointment. A manager who you certainly can't question. His CV is incredible. A guy that the type of manager that since Jurgen Klinsmann probably that the US have been trying to bring to these shores. So I think right off the bat, certainly worldwide, Pochettino's recognised as one of the best coaches. So it's a huge coup, and obviously his reputation and his history with younger players. Because right now, the US does have a young squad, which is great, but obviously they need to be guided. And so when you've got a young squad that hasn't been guided properly, which I don't think they have, then you kind of see what happens. They're inconsistent. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. You're really not quite sure what you're getting. So Pochettino's certainly resume points towards bringing on young players and making them consistent and making them consistently good.
Mark, with this appointment, has the United States Soccer Federation got themselves out of a hole that they got themselves into by reappointing Greg Berhalter?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was a strange reappointment, especially when you consider the whole Gio Reyna stuff as a background noise to it as well. It didn't really make sense that you would retain a guy that had a poor World Cup and a guy that had issues with one of his best players. So, I think bringing in Pochettino it's a fantastic appointment. I think it shows real ambition by the US. I think he'll just raise standards. I think because he's got, real worked experience in the biggest leagues in the world, the Premier League, League in with PSG, the Champions League. He's just been to places that the majority of predecessors haven't been anywhere near, apart from Jurgen Klinsmann. The majority of his predecessors have basically been US grown coaches who, with all due respect, haven't got any real experience outside a very kind of insular goldfish bowl. And I think Pochettino comes in with different eyes, different perspective. I think he will inspire the players. He will inspire the fans. I don't really see a downside to this appointment. And I think as well the fact that he would have been considered for the England manager's job shows you how much of a coup this is for the US, because Pochettino was keen on the England job, but the US have come along, got the deal done, and England are still looking around for a manager.
Okay, Ryan, why the United States? Why take a salary of what we're led to believe is $6 million a year, which is around $8 million less than he was getting at Chelsea? The attraction of the US men's national team for Pochettino is what?
Well, I think in a way the US sort of lucked into this because we're in like this weird phase with club soccer where a lot of the big teams don't have as much money as they used to. A lot of the teams are now being run by hedge fund people that have sort of different objectives in mind, I guess, when building a soccer team. So you have a handful of incredibly accomplished coaches that were getting passed up in favor of people like, let's say, Vincent Kompany, someone who gets relegated from the Premier League and then gets the Bayern job, or Enzo Maresca becoming the Chelsea manager instead of Pochettino. So I think there was like a weird little sort of shifting of the landscape that I think allowed the US to capitalize on this. And so I think that plus the fact that the World Cup is in the US, and I honestly don't think that it's sort of a short-term year and a half has to turn this thing around, get the team performing at a higher level. I honestly think that probably the shorter term part of it played a role in him wanting to do it, because you do it for a year and a half. US does great. You can decide if you want to stay on. If the US does great, you're going to have plenty of club opportunities as well. So it really doesn't, it feels like a win-win, like Mark said, a win for the US and a win for Pochettino. It's a sort of upside for everyone, it feels like.
Sorry, Stevie.
I think you've got to look at the situation. It's kind of a perfect storm for the US, because there's no question. Trying to put yourself in Pochettino's shoes, his last two jobs, you talk about frustrating and disillusioning you about the game of football. You know, PSG, on the face of it, seemed like a fantastic job. He gets it. Yes, he's got 3 trophies, but listen, me and Augie could get 3 trophies if we were running PSG. So, but what's going on outside of the football pitch is an absolute nightmare. You know, we want to coach because we enjoy football and we enjoy football players. But when you've got all this other stuff constantly, day after day after day, and regardless of what you do, it seems like you're not doing the right thing. So you go from that to Chelsea, and then you see what happens at Chelsea. Again, you're trying to work with your players. That's what you want to do, but you've got all this other stuff going on that just constantly wears you down day after day. So I think the US have got him in a position where he wants something fresh, something that he can be in charge of, something he can get a hold of, and he obviously thinks that he can do something with his squad. You know, he's not just blindly said, "All right, I like this." He's obviously looked at the players. He thinks he can help them. He thinks he can certainly make the US better. And so, as Ryan said, you know, for 18 months, a couple of years, then instead of sitting in the house waiting on another job that's going to drive him crazy, I'll take this and actually I might enjoy myself.
Yeah, there's a really good piece on ESPN.com by ESPN's very own Jeff Carlisle. It's kind of the inside story into how they were able to get someone they probably initially thought, I don't think we're going to get him. It seemed like him and Klopp were the two initially, and they knew they weren't going to get Klopp, but they ended up getting Pochettino. One of the things that Jeff speaks about in the article, Mark, is 2026 and the World Cup and the expectations. And the USSF are hoping that Pochettino can lead the US to at least the quarterfinals. With the talent they have available, is that a reasonable ask for the new man?
I think it could be tough, but it all depends on the route to the final, doesn't it? And, you know, they could come out of the group and play a Brazil or an Argentina. It depends on the look of the draw. If they get a favourable draw, they could definitely ride it to the quarterfinals. But I do think at this point out from the finals, 18 months' time, it is a tall order. But I do think that the US have got home advantage. But it's too early to say, Mark. I think they can't do any worse than last time. I think there's definitely certainly the copper of this summer, I should say. I think that Pochettino will make them better. He'll get people like Pulisic and Tyler Adams, you know, playing to a different level. But it all depends on the route to the latter stage. And I think if they get a favourable route, they'll do okay. But if they get a tough route, then I think the first top team they face, they'll probably lose against, unless Pochettino can oversee a incredible turnaround of belief and confidence in the next, 18 months. So it's a tall order, that. But just back to the question about it, why he's taking it. Mm-hmm. I think people are kind of underestimating the power of the US sporting landscape. Now, the salary that he's earning may be half of what he could earn in the Premier League or in Europe. But I think if you're successful in the US, then your earning potential absolutely rockets. I think, we look at if Klopp had gone there, exactly the same. But I think Pochettino's got a real personality. He could really engage with the US public. I think if he gets this team going, playing well, and they do well at the World Cup, his earning potential off the field will be much bigger than anything he could have imagined in Europe or the UK. So there's that as well. So I think, and he's got this chance, he could be the guy that finally gets the US on course to being a proper footballing power. I'm not saying that a power of the likes of Brazil, Argentina, Germany, France, but I do think that they can climb another level to be in that second tier of teams.
Ryan, you can kind of go back 10, 11 years for a relationship between Matt Crocker, who's the USSF sporting director, and he was at Southampton. That's how he kind of got to know Pochettino. But look, we all have friends in the business, and it doesn't mean to say that you're going to get the best job or you're going to approach someone like Pochettino and he's going to come here. The interesting thing, there were many things in Jeff's article about the money, and now they've taken their commercial revenue in-house rather than give it to a third party. They're about 60 million up over the past 12 months. So the fact that they're doing this and we're able to get Pochettino, it seems to be that, they made a mess of the Berhalter stuff, but there's a lot of good things going on at the USSF, starting with the commercial revenue, allowing them to be able to afford Pochettino.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have been very critical of U.S. soccer over the past 10, 15, 20 years. And you just take a step back and you could make a really good argument that the U.S. women's team and the U.S. men's team have the two best coaches in international soccer for both sides. You could easily make the case for Pochettino, easily make the case for Emma Hayes. And that's just a massive turnaround after Vlatko Andonovski really struggled with the women's team. They were so much better and so much more cohesive under Emma Hayes. And Berhalter, while I think we forget, like, there was genuine like pleasure with the U.S.'s performance at the last World Cup outside of people in the U.S. But I think hanging on to Berhalter for a term, an extra term, proved to be a mistake. And to go from those two coaches to Mauricio Pochettino, who's just every team he's coached has improved, other than maybe PSG, and Emma Hayes, who is arguably the best coach in all of them. Yeah, it's the commercial revenue is great, but also, like, you know, for all the issues and inefficiencies about U.S. soccer, to land on those two coaches, you really can't ask for much more than that.
Stevie's got the players. We've seen that. They're talented. They play at the top level across Europe and the world. So what's gone wrong, and how can he fix that? Because they've only won once. That was against Bolivia since March. Is it simply a case of coming in with what he's got on his CV, Pochettino, and things will happen? Or is it not as simple as that?
No, it's basics, but and as easy as that sounds, it's clearly not easy to put a team together and put the jigsaw together. You know, straight away he's got to get them on the toes. You know, that this last cycle seems as though they were all just relaxed too much. You know, everything was too easy. You know, he in my opinion will get them on their toes every time. You know, I always say it, all the best teams, when the manager walks in the room or the manager walks on the field or wherever it is, if you notice, everybody sort of takes a little, stands to attention a little bit, but he has them on their toes. So that's just because of his reputation. I believe that'll happen, and then he'll hold them to a standard. But then the most important thing is, how does he put the pieces of the puzzle together in order to make them a fluid, solid, number one, attacking team that can take on anybody and compete? Because right now they can beat the also-rans. Well, I shouldn't say that. They drew one each with New Zealand. But generally they can beat the also-rans. When it comes to playing the so-called bigger and better teams, they're just way short. And probably half of it's confidence as well, because they know they're way short. So these are all the things that Pochettino has given to all the teams that he's been in, pretty much. Certainly Espanyol when he started, no question Southampton, and absolutely with Tottenham. I mean, he took them to a Champions League final. So, yeah, this guy will get them on their toes, but it's how he puts the pieces together that will determine whether they can compete in a World Cup against the best sides. That's always going to be the tough part for a coach. Which pieces fit the best way in order to make us better?
Mark, final point on Pochettino. It's Panama first up in October in Austin. Then he's got a friendly in Mexico. How much time do you think it'll take him just to get used to the fact it's not really a day-to-day industry and business being a national team coach? He's going to be based in Georgia. He's going to fly a lot to Europe to watch his players there. But it's not seeing your players on the training ground every single day. It's seeing them, getting them for 4 or 5 days or a couple of weeks, and then not seeing them again for a few months. How do you think you'll cope with that?
Well, I mean, he has had kind of lengthy periods at work over the last 2 or 3 years, so it won't be completely alien to him. But I do think he'll enjoy being on the training pitch. And, you know, with the MLS season being out of kilter with the European season, he might get time outside the traditional windows to work with these players. So he might find a way around it. I'm sure the USSF are going to use him quite a lot in terms of coaching the kids, the younger players. So I don't think he'll have a lot of time on his hands. But, you know, he'll always have to get back to Europe as well. He'll have to scout a lot of players in the European game. So I don't think he'll be sat on his hands very often, but he'll be desperate to get on the training field when he has that game against Panama and then Mexico. And, you know, Mexico, I know they're in a bit of a mess right now. They're probably in a worse state than the US, but the US-Mexico game, no matter where it is a real test of both sides. So I think he'll relish the fact that he's got such a big game early on to test the mental strength of his players. Are they do they have the kind of that kind of resolve to match their ability? And Mexico away is a good early sighter for him to say, are you guys what I need, or do I need to look at other players?
Mm-hmm. Good luck to Mauricio Pochettino with the US men's national team. Good appointment by the USSF. Now, as promised, we're going to look back at the Premier League's opening 3 games and look ahead. And when Ryan joins us on the show, he's written articles about where teams are compared to where they should be. And he's written a new article at ESPN.com. Rather than steal his thunder, set up this next portion of ESPN FC Live today, Ryan. What article have you written, and what does it explain about what you've seen so far from the opening 3 games in the Premier League?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how mathematical to be without Mark and Stevie falling asleep.
I'll keep it simple for Stevie and Mark. You just explain what you need to explain, and then we'll take it from there.
Basically, I wanted to see if there were any statistics that historically over 3 games can predict where teams will end up by the end of the season. And obviously, there's nothing that you can just look at and then just know 100%. Well, if this team has this stat, they will finish there. But there's one number that sort of explains, over the past decade, it explains 40% of the variation in a team's points from at the end of the season. So it essentially explains 40% of a team's final point total, which is like quite good from something that happens from just 3 games. The stat is the stat is a combination of expected goals and just actual goals. So basically, it's weighing a team's ability to create and prevent chances, and also a team's ability to convert those chances. So 70% expected goals, 30% goals ends up being having reasonably a powerful indicator of how the rest of your season is going to go.
Stevie, I'm not going to ask you to explain R squared, which is kind of what Ryan has used. But basically, his article says that it's kind of a total dichotomy for the teams on Merseyside. Everton are in big trouble and have been worse than they thought they were going to be. And Liverpool have been slightly better, one of only 2 teams unbeaten and having won all their games. So Liverpool champions, Everton relegated. Would you take that, Mr. Nicol?
Well, absolutely, I would take it. I mean, I certainly wouldn't like Everton to get relegated, I'll be honest. No. But if the deal was Everton get relegated and we win the title, then unfortunately Everton are down the pan. So, yeah. Listen, it's always tough to hang your hat on the statistics. I mean, look at Spurs this time last year. Never mind this time. 10 games in, top of the league, absolutely flying. So, yeah, I understand that stats can be revealing, but they can also trip themselves up if you rely on them too heavily. So, yeah, I'll take that definitely.
Mark, there's obviously a place in modern football for anything you can kind of use to get an advantage is a help. Now, there are old school managers that have someone else doing that for them, or maybe aren't even interested. And there are younger managers. A lot of them, the Brighton manager is one of many who's very stats driven. What have you seen so far in layman's terms from the Premier League games that have taken place that makes you think they've overachieved, they've underachieved, they could be in trouble, and they were a surprise?
Well, it's kind of hard considering the opposition. So, sure. I think Liverpool have overachieved, but then they've had 3 easy games, including Man United. So we can't really judge the level of the opposition. So I do think that it is an early stage. But just to pick up on Ryan's point, I do think that kind of anecdotally, I remember, so, in the early part of the Premier League year, Sir Alex Ferguson would always say that United would kind of take the time to hit the straps, and that he wanted them to be at their best by around December time. But he made the point that when Jose Mourinho came in at Chelsea, Mourinho's team started like a train, and Ferguson had to change the way that his team prepared for a season. He knew they had to start quickly to make sure that they weren't out of the running by, the autumn. But it's now gone on another level whereby, Man City, Arsenal, certainly Man City, even Liverpool, when they win it, they are just at the top of their game right from day one. And they're winning games. And, if you cannot allow yourself to fall behind these teams. So I guess, to Ryan's point, you can get an idea after 3 or 4 games as to what's going to happen. I think the teams at the top tend to stick tend to retain their form. I know Spurs dropped off like last year, but they still, I think they finished 5th, so they're obviously going to finish high up. So the early part of the season can be indicative, and I think Everton will really struggle to get out of it. I think Liverpool will retain, will sustain their push at the top, and overperformers. I think Brighton, obviously, you've got to look at Brighton and think nobody expected that, especially with a young new manager that people were thinking, has he got the experience to manage in the Premier League? Well, it's early days, but he's certainly shown himself to be ready for it at this stage. And underperforming, there's only one team, and it's always the same team. It's Man United. Every year they start slowly and leave themselves too much to do. I was trying to think, and Ryan might have the answer to this. The last time, or the latest part of the season that Man United were above Man City, and I think the last 2-3 years, I think from even on the opening day to the second game, that was it. They were never above Man City again. And that is the point about you have to start well, because the top teams will pull away from you. So, Man United have got a lot of improving to do, but we say that every year.
Yeah, and they're not even above them in alphabetical goal difference or anything like that, because it's United and City. Look, when you're asked to write these, Ryan, this must be the hardest one. 3 games in, you look at as you've mentioned in your article, Ipswich games. I mean, come on now. Liverpool, Man City, they've had a horrible start. Some of the teams, Nottingham Forest, have had an easier start. But when you join us and when you write these articles going forward, when do you think is the optimum time that you can kind of look at the fixtures and think, yeah, I can get a good judge on that? Is it after every team has played each other once, or do you think you can do it before then?
I think historically around 10 games.
Okay.
Even if you kind of just look at it from like a purely data perspective, it's 10 games. And I think 10 games just makes sense. There are still lopsided things, like red cards will have an outside effect, penalties will have an outside effect. There will be some teams with ridiculously hard or easy 10-game schedules, but for the most part, 10 games is kind of the sweet spot where you can start to feel confident. But yeah, it's like anything. I feel like each season we come into the season with our general perceptions of what's going to happen, and then each game, whether you're using numbers or not, you're adjusting off of your perception, right? Like if you viewed Man U as Manchester United as a top 4 challenger, you watch the first game and you're like, okay, maybe that's still true. Then you watch them play Brighton and you're like, probably not. You watch them play Liverpool and you're like, okay, most likely not. So it's whether using numbers or not. I feel like the early part of the season, each game is just providing a little bit more information about these teams, how the players are going to play together with another year together, with how the new players are going to meld in, how the new manager is going to change the way the team plays. So yeah, whether you're using numbers or not, I feel like it's a similar process in sort of figuring out how we feel about things with each new game.
Stevie, Arsenal's an interesting one for me, because you look at game 4 before the season begins and you go, okay, Arsenal have got the North London derby away from home after the international break in September. That's before the start of the season. Then the international break takes place and Martin Odegaard is going to be out. Also, Declan Rice is going to be suspended. Arsenal won their first 2, but didn't beat Brighton after Rice was suspended. So, from an Arsenal perspective, has this game taken on added significance, albeit it's already a North London derby, given that they're going to be without 2 key midfielders on Sunday?
I think it's difficult not to think that it absolutely does. And again, it's not just about Arsenal. If you look at what City are doing, because generally over the last couple of seasons, they've not started particularly well. But the fact that they've started like a house on fire, if you're Arsenal, you're thinking already, we can't afford to be dropping points this early on and let them get some sort of lead, because this is a team that as the season goes on gets better. So you throw in the fact that Rice is missing and Odegaard's going to be injured, then absolutely 100% it takes on a little more significance. Now, at the same time, the fact that it's Spurs will take away any of that overthinking, because it's such a big game on its own, regardless of where the 2 teams are in the league, that you have to be 100% focused on it. So I guess there's a little bit of leeway that they won't be thinking about City or thinking about the league. It'll be, we need to beat Spurs. So maybe that's a positive for them. However, I must admit, even though they've lost those 2, I still expect them to win this game.
Okay, we're going to end this, Ryan, with 3 topics here: the title race, the top 4, and relegation. You're going to tell me, sum it up, bullet points, what your article kind of found out about each of these 3 topics, and Stevie and Mark will either agree or disagree. So, the title race, what did you find?
I think the title race, the big takeaway is that Liverpool have a legit shot to win the title. But there's a lot of uncertainty with the new coach and the new style of play. And obviously they haven't had a super difficult schedule, but they've been fantastic. They've basically crushed everyone that they've played. And teams that are as good as Liverpool have been to start tend to hang around in the title race. So I think that's the big thing I would say for the title race. Arsenal haven't been great, but they also have not been great in most seasons under Mikel Arteta to start. A couple years ago, they were the worst team of the past 10 years based on this metric I described, and they ended up finishing 5th. We all remember them losing to Brentford and the games against City and Chelsea, where it seemed like Arteta was about to lose his job. So I don't think writing off Arsenal makes sense, but sliding Liverpool as a legit contender, I think is the way to view the title race. Top 4, most of the teams that were battling for top 4 are around the same level with this metric. I think you could make a good case for Brighton as a potential top 4 outsider. The thing I think about them, their numbers are really good, and usually they don't spend a lot of money on any single player, but they spent over 30 million on 6 different guys this summer, and only one of them has played significant minutes so far. So if those guys start to play, plus Evan Ferguson, Julio Enciso get more minutes, there's like a good upside for Brighton. While on the other end, United, everyone knows they stink. You don't need numbers to tell you that. But also Newcastle, they have 7 points, but their performances really have not been great. Southampton, they got a red card, but were way worse than I think you'd expect a team to be. That's going to theoretically challenging for top 4 with a man down against our worst team in the league. Against Bournemouth, they were outplayed. Against Spurs, they did win. They probably created the better chances, but Spurs lived inside of Newcastle's penalty area in a way that didn't feel sustainable to me. So I think Newcastle, I thought they could challenge the top 4 coming into the season. Now I'm downgrading them to the fringes of that, I would say. And relegation, we talked about it. I thought Everton were a lot better than people realized last year, mainly because of the points deduction. And you would look at the table and see where they were standing. And if you just added in their normal points that they would have got from their performances, they would have been totally fine. But they've been like truly awful so far this year. No points and performances that didn't deserve any points. So I think alarm bells and Everton would be my title race addition.
Mark, we've had Ryan on a lot of times before, and sometimes there's ESPN FCers desperate to pick a fight and say, that's not right, this is wrong, and can't believe you've done that. There's not too much to debate in his findings today. Stevie's happy that Liverpool are up there as big-time title contenders. Any surprises from what you've heard Ryan say?
Well, I think he didn't mention Chelsea, and I guess that's because nobody at this stage can decide what Chelsea are going to be.
What are they?
Well, exactly. But they could be.
And who is that?
That's Todd Bowley on the phone. He's trying to get a deal for Chelsea. But I think that Chelsea could finish top 4. They could finish mid-table. It depends on how things go in Nebraska. But I think, it's hard to pick a surprise. I'd say what is significant for me. I think at the weekend, I know Stevie thinks Arsenal will win at Tottenham, but they've got Tottenham away this weekend with massive injury or shortage of personnel, and they got a Man City the week after. So if it goes wrong at Tottenham, and then they lose at City, then they could be 8 points behind Man City before mid-September, and I think that would be too much for Arsenal to claw back. So it's a significant period of time for Arsenal. Relegation-wise, I think Everton have got it all to do, and it's a shame because they're going to move into the new stadium next season. But I just don't see how they can get out of the mess they're in. They are in a terrible mess because of the squad, the lack of finances, the situation around the club, the takeover. I just think Everton look doomed, unfortunately, because they're a big club, but I just don't think they're going to get out of it.
Arsenal go to Bergamo as well to face Atalanta in between those 2 games. Going to end with Stevie, going to end with Liverpool. Obviously, they've got the trip to the San Siro after the Forest game, but you've got to be happy with what you've seen so far from Arne Slot having replaced Jurgen Klopp, Stevie.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, a little surprised, I've got to say. I didn't think they'd be quite so smooth. Other than the first half at Ipswich, they've been really smooth. I think it's a little early to say they're going to be competing for the title, to be quite frank with you. I think, as we speak, it's between City and Arsenal. But the three I've mentioned are absolutely, no question, clear of the rest. And it is a fight for fourth spot. You know, I'm a bit like Ryan. I thought Newcastle, the fact they don't have any Europe, I thought they'd be a good shout. I thought they'd get back to where they were before last season. But as Ryan said, they've struggled. So I think that fourth spot's probably between about 4 or 5 teams. I don't believe Brighton are good enough. Defensively, I don't think they're good enough. I'm not a fan of Duncan Van Hecken partnership. And Brighton do play an open game. I mean, they're going to drop. They're going to score a lot of goals and they're going to get a lot of points, but they're going to drop a lot of points as well and a lot of goals. But as far as Liverpool's concerned, yeah, it's great that they're looking good. It's great that everybody thinks that they're going to compete. But I'm not quite ready yet to have them as title contenders. No question. Top 4. I think they'll be comfortable in the top 4. Actually, Everton will stay up. Oh. Everton battered Bournemouth for 80 minutes at Goodison Park. And again, that's the key for me, Goodison Park, because they will pick up points at Goodison. I know it was a complete and utter disaster, the way they fell apart against Bournemouth. But the other 3 sides that came up, they've got no understanding or knowledge of how to stay in the Premier League, which is why Everton have got the edge on them, because they know, and Dyche knows what it takes to stay in it. And as I said, Goodison Park is going to be the key for me. So, yeah, Liverpool, I don't believe right now will win the title, and I don't believe Everton will get relegated. Sorry, Ryan, because completely against every single thing you said about Everton and Liverpool.
So we end today with arms across Stanley Park in friendship from Stevie Nicol. We'll be back on Friday. Stevie can have a wee rest in his armchair. Mark Ogden can pick up the phone to Todd Bowley. And Ryan can have a lie down, a much-deserved lie down after that article that he wrote, which you can read at ESPN.com. My thanks to the boys. We will do it all again on Friday. Bye for now.